Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 600 likes on this one. I think if everybody took just a quick second, we could do it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. And I'm also actually a real person that narrates the stories. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I'm a nurse. I tell a lot of stories to curious people who tend to regret asking right after. It's hard to find another job that matches the sheer breadth of human suffering I'm exposed to daily. The human body is an unbelievably beautiful and complex organism that can contort and be contorted in some wildly obscene ways. And I've had my fair share of horrible sights in my time. Wounds fester, gallbladders fill with stones, forks get stuck in eyes. We are precious little things, and the same body that can survive a fall from a plane can die from a stubbed toe. Not that I figured the survivor of the fall particularly wanted to survive at that point. Anyway, my point being, everybody who's ever spent any time in a hospital has seen some gnarly that they'd rather leave behind forever. Even sitting in a waiting room can lead to boredom that can lead to a peek through a door that can lead to a burn victim convulsing in his bed. I always hope that the folks who take that home with them develop a new appreciation for life and empathy for their fellow man. Personally, I worked on the floor that said burn victim was treated on, and his moaning made me grind my teeth all night. Sometimes I want to put my head through the wall as payback for the god-awful thoughts I've had about people who were suffering and dying with the audacity to do it near me. It's not a job for everyone. It's hardly a job for anyone. But you get used to it. You sit in it and live with it. The hospital becomes this third place that no one else can really see. You look at a bed in the corner of the room and you remember the last 3 people that died in it. The fourth's face is already gone. It's good to remember, to appreciate, to hold the knowledge that they were real. They thought and felt, and it can mess you up if you let it. It's only now that it's flooding back in. I let it flow through me. It hits and it goes. The wind doesn't knock me over, but little bits get stuck. They itch bad. Now I'm there again. I think I might be done with hospitals soon. It's been a couple years. Back then, I was at work every day and almost every night. My divorce sucked bad and I thought it might kill me if I spent any more time at home than I had to. I'm good at my job. I can autopilot for days. Sometimes I sit in my car afterwards and can't remember a single thing I said or did the whole day. Nobody's ever complained. Nobody's ever given me crap from above. I'm not a surgeon or anything. I wasn't cutting hearts open with my eyes closed. I was often checking on people who were bedridden, placing bedpans and listening to them complain in one ear as it went out the other. There's nothing better to tune out. When I'm in that building, I'm a nurse, not a person. I work and I forget. That kind of fugue state is not good for you, to say the least. I'd highly recommend trying your best not to get disconnected from reality like that. When it breaks and comes back to the surface, it hits like a truck. It kills. I know it. In those weeks I spent on autopilot, I slowly realized that I only remembered a single thing from every workday. One patient in one room. He was an older man who'd been transferred from another facility after spending over a year in a coma. He was just some guy. Some normal guy who, according to his family, had fallen unconscious while at home and never woke back up. They visited him sometimes, almost always alone. 2 young men and 1 older woman who would just sit in with him for an hour or 2 and whisper to him, like he could still hear it. It was a sweet gesture, I thought. Too many people are left by their families to rot in their beds. I think unconscious people still have some sort of awareness of reality, even blurred through the impossible layer of a coma. They were always leaving when I came in, sparing me a glance or two before hurrying away. One of the young men always had a certain angry tiredness to him, the circles under his eyes making his frown sharper. He always spent the least time visiting, and held himself with a certain rigidity, hands always in his pockets. I was curious, somehow, wondering who they were to him, and, stranger, wondering why I cared at all. At the end of every day, I could only vividly remember being in his room, seeing him with his eyes closed, watching those people whisper and stand and leave. I didn't care about anything else, but I always remembered that, and only in retrospect. It started to keep me up. I worried my mind was making choices for me. It was always the same. I'd walk into his room. He was laying there on his back, still, eyes closed. His hands were always clasped over his chest, right over left, and his body was totally straight. I know some people find that creepy, like a corpse in a casket, but I sleep like that too, so it never bothered me. He just seemed so restful. I don't know what it's like to be in a coma, but looking at him, I always had a twinge of jealousy. Imagine the rest, the weight off his shoulders, dreams or empty silence. I thought I'd rather be him than go back to my house and my husband again, so I always tried to make him comfortable. If his visitors had been by, they often left his head pointed to the side and his pillow jostled into a weird spot that didn't seem great for his neck. The blanket was always sloppily moved onto him, like they'd fussed with it and forgotten how to set it back up. I figured, why judge them for trying their best to make their loved one more comfortable? Who am I to know what he liked? Regardless, I tried my best. I'd readjust him, fix the curtains at the window, clean up his bedside table, and move the hair from his eyes. It always felt like the right thing to do. I always thought that he had a mild little smile on his face, an upturning at the corner of his lips, something slipping through from his dream, or vice versa. Maybe I made him a little happier then. I started to focus harder at work, be present, work with the older patients in my area of the hospital. I slept well. A few months into his stay, I ran into the tired young man on his way out of the room. His hands were out of his pockets for once, and he was clutching them together with a strange tightness. He was grimacing and breathing heavily. I felt my heart jump. I don't know what it was. I decided to bring him flowers, and nearly dropped them as he pushed past me and vanished down the hallway. I had to stop for a moment before I could make myself enter the room. The man in the bed was still there. He was still on his back, and his hands were still clasped together. The blanket was halfway off of him, worse than usual, and I went to fix it when I noticed something I'd never seen before. He was wearing a ring on his right hand, middle finger. He had what looked like a typical wedding band. I couldn't figure out if it had been there before, if I'd just glossed over it every time, if I was just put off by his visitor's behavior. It's not really permitted for long-term coma patients to have any jewelry or accessory like that. Who'd have let that slip by for this long? It had to have just been put on him. I wondered if the young man had found his wedding ring and snuck it back to him, which struck me as surprisingly sweet. Though I hadn't heard anything about him being married, and none of the visitors identified themselves, or acted anything like a spouse that I could tell. Like I'd know. But there it was, plain and simple on his finger. I went to remove it, and had it halfway up his finger when I second-guessed myself, and let him keep it. I guess it just felt wrong to rob him of it. After all the time he'd spent alone and unconscious, I let him keep it. I think about that a lot. It was the next day when everything started. I came in, fixed him up, and was drawing the curtains when he began to groan. It was a low, long, pitiful kind of noise, like a wounded man bleeding out on the floor, alone. It lasted for so long. I immediately looked for any sign of injury or motion, but he still just lay there, mouth hanging open, groaning. It made me mad. I don't know why. I hate to admit it, but it really made me mad. Something about the sound just got under my skin in the worst way. I wanted to hit him across the face. I held it in. Some of my coworkers came to investigate, immediately complaining of the sound. We all had this vague frustration with the poor man. They moved him to check for injuries despite my insistence that I already had, jostling him roughly as they flipped him over and looked at his back. There was nothing, of course. He stopped groaning after a few minutes, but it was enough to set all of us on edge for the rest of the day. I still fixed him back up in a comfortable position, but there was an undeniable air of unease and frustration in the room. I left him alone. His visitors stopped coming. I never saw any of them ever again. Every day he'd groan and we'd all start to slip. It pushed our buttons until they broke. He was alone in that room and he was suffering, loudly. Sometimes he'd cry or shout, just for a moment as if in fear. The patients near him became even more irritable. They'd push each other, yell from their beds, leave their rooms unauthorized to insult others from the door. We'd curtly get them back into their beds and then leave to argue with our coworkers. The whole place got nasty. I hated it. It was worse than being home. I spent a lot of time in my car. I was late. My supervisor was late. We left people in their rooms for hours. No one died, but there were too many close calls. Too many minor medical emergencies that almost became fatal. People in the waiting rooms would file complaints before their appointments even began. People I trusted and liked were fired, and I was glad to see them gone. The man still slept. I still took it upon myself to make sure he was okay, but I never did it with the care I once had. He started to move. He'd groan. Then he'd roll onto his side or rub his arm with his hand or cover his eyes. He fell out of bed a few times, his skin starting to bruise. Overnight, he'd managed to scratch himself with his fingernails that we'd neglected to cut. He'd have scabs I'd never noticed before. He started to groan less and scream more. He just never shut up. A doctor punched his nurse in the face and knocked him out. A bleeding patient was left waiting for hours. 3 scalpels went missing. I kicked a hole in the wall. The lights seemed darker and they buzzed on and on. It felt louder than my own voice. The hallways always seemed too long. I'd walk for minutes and only realized I'd passed where I was going after turning around to see I'd gone way past it. I started crying in front of patients without noticing, and he still cried, and groaned and screamed. I could hear it from outside. I could hear it when I was asleep. Soon enough, I was the only one who'd step foot in his room. They'd been moving patients to the other end of the wing when possible and spending as little time nearby as they could. I'm not sure if it helped. If there was ever any real attempt at intervention or investigation from above, I didn't see it. I think the hospital just rotted and we all let it. I still wanted to try, to keep the place afloat, to do the community the service it deserved. So I still went into his room. I was hoping he'd die by now, but I wanted it to be in comfort. The perception of time in a coma must be wholly incomprehensible, and I can only hope that his pain was physically alone, his moans the product of a biological reflex, his suffering only visible on the surface. I want to believe that he was just asleep. I pray that he could not feel. I noticed his ring again one day. The skin around it had begun to swell, and he was slowly brushing it with his other hand. Lightly, gently, up and down. It was uncharacteristic. His movements were often jerky, rapid, frightening. His moans whispered out, and his eyes moved lazily under his eyelids. I realized that I was just staring at him. The image of his body, has always been unforgettable, but it struck me more than ever that day. I stood there for a long time before my instincts kicked in, and I had a look at his finger. The ring was still so clean, almost reflective. The skin beside it had begun to turn red, and suddenly, it seemed right to try and remove it. Whoever this signified a relationship to, they clearly had nothing to do with him anymore. Relief is a precious thing, and he deserved the little I could try to give him. I went to remove it. The ring didn't budge. Never before or since have I attempted to do something that failed so immediately as that. It just didn't shift in the slightest when I pulled on it. I still don't understand how anything could be on so tight, so stuck. It was unbelievable. I remembered how easily it had slid across his finger the first time I touched it, what seemed like so long ago. Now, it defied me. It felt wrong to even touch it. The reddened part of his skin felt hot. I was possessed with the urge to break his finger and force the ring off. I had to bite my hand to send it away. I fixed his bed as quickly as I could and escaped. I occasionally gave the ring another pull or two when coming by just to reaffirm that I was feeling reality, that the world was not lying to me. It was just stuck and there was nothing I could do about it that didn't make me feel sick. My divorce proceedings were coming up. I was going to be away from the hospital for a little while. There was a certain sick pull that made it hard to get away, but I told myself repeatedly that it would be good for me. It had to happen. I visited him again on my last night there. He'd stopped making much noise. His vocal cords must have been damaged at this point, and his general demeanor had changed. When I came in, he was arching his back, forehead pressed into his pillow, stomach in the air. His eyes were rolling back, and his mouth just hung open. I could hear him, even still, whispering long and quiet. His hands were still crossed over his chest. I just ran forward and took one in my own hand, and he somehow began to relax his posture and slide back to rest in the bed. It was the most directly he'd ever responded to something I did, and it scared me. I was immediately frozen, his fingers in my hand. He shouldn't have been able to react to anything. I still cannot fathom what kind of awareness he might have had at any point. God, if he was there the whole time, present but trapped. I stayed with him for longer than I should have, half terrified to leave and half moved to comfort him. He still made me so angry sometimes. The false rage that puts holes in walls, but that night I could not find anger in me. I pulled. I breathed past the icy fear, and I pulled on his ring. My fingertips burned from the strain. The arching red marks left on them lasted for days. I grabbed his wrist with my other hand. I pulled. I put my foot against the bed. I pulled. I bit into my lip. My fingers slipped and dropped hard against the floor. My hands were empty. It was pointless. He looked at me. Through his closed eyes, his body laid against the bed, but his head was stuck perpendicular, recessed into the pillow and certainly, obviously bent, twisted, his chin digging into his chest. And he stared. His eyelids couldn't hide that he was looking for something in the dark. The rest of his body was so still. Imagine the urge to right yourself as your neck cramps. Your jaw tightens and you can't even move your fingers. You can't even open your eyes. I coughed and gagged and crawled away in fear. I left him like that and hid outside. The sense of relief was immense at first. Being away from that environment reminded me how I felt in the sunlight. Everything smelled better. I didn't dig my fingernails into my palm. In court, it came back. I couldn't blink without feeling like my eyes would never open again. I listened, I spoke. I looked my husband in the face and left scrapes on the side of my chair. I've never had to explain this before. It's hard to make the hole in my brain feel real. I've never cared about anything that much. I didn't care about my own divorce while it was happening. I wanted to be anything else. I wanted to hurt myself. Nothing bad even happened. No one said anything, did anything. I just wanted to bite a chunk from my own arm every minute. Something wormed in there and made me sick. I threw up on the carpet before God and everyone. I was very nearly hospitalized. I was just so afraid that something was going to happen. Something is always about to happen. It worked out. I'm single again. My ex-husband got a lot of things in the split. It's not the worst time anyone has had in the courtroom. Everything real seems so small. I hit my head against the wall a few times and went back to work. The lights weren't on when I pulled into the parking lot outside the hospital. It was already late. The rest of the building was lit up as usual, but my wing was dark. A pit formed in my stomach as I sat there, craning my neck to see through the windows, squinting, thinking. We were all professionals. It should never have been able to get this bad. For us all to slip. I still don't get it. The window went back into forever. Something far behind it was lit, a tiny light spilling from behind a cracked door. Something moved in front of it. I swallowed the fear and bit my lip. I still had to go to work. I had to turn the lights back on. A few people were moving in the parking lot, coming in and out, being pushed in wheelchairs and hurrying to appointments. It seemed like no one else had any feeling of foreboding, of an encroaching darkness. The lights were just off in one wing. I was just losing my mind. It was cold and I was still alone. I hurried through the door and towards the first elevator. I always tried to avoid looking too troubled at work. Being in a hospital is already a stress-inducing situation for most, and I'm very aware that watching medical personnel with grim looks on their faces can often make that worse. It's one of the reasons why I had been so frustrated with the recent state of the place. When we were all on edge, so were the patients, and I'll always hate that they suffered for our problems. Saying that, I know that when I walked through that lobby, I looked like hell. The people waiting nearby later cited seeing me as their first indication that something terrible had happened. How they hadn't noticed anything before, I can't tell. When those elevator doors opened, I pushed harshly past two elderly women who were exiting. One turned back, and whatever she saw on my face nearly knocked her over. I hit the button 1,000 times before the door closed. The elevator crawled upwards and I stood, clenching my fists, centering. The fog in my head was too strong. I lost track of too much then. I'd been in this elevator hundreds of times before. I'd left my mind empty as I autopiloted into work. I'd never noticed how quiet it was. Everything slipped through the cracks and into the shaft. My heartbeat was loudest. I went up. A distant sound descended upon me, constant, so high-pitched I barely noticed it, growing in strength with every inch I went up. It was no human voice, no pain moans, no cries of fear. It was artificial, electronic, long and piercing and high, overwhelming. It pressed me into the floor of the elevator, and it grew. There were more behind it, pushing through, together, harmonizing. Something on my floor was singing. In my head, in my head. I put my palms on the doors and felt the cold. The doors opened and the song broke. The metal slipped from under my hands and I toppled out into the noise, into the darkness of my workplace. The melody was gone. Now it was only sharp. It pierced me as I crawled out of the elevator, and only then, only when I looked up and around, did I realize what I'd been hearing. The heart monitors. The heart monitors in every room were screaming in the dark. Almost everyone in a bed on this floor had stopped breathing. Their hearts had stopped pumping. Well, I wasn't there. The one time that I wasn't there, they wouldn't let me forget. Not while their monitors could scream. It was still dark. I pulled myself up by the receptionist counter and looked with the lights of the equipment and the little moonlight coming through the windows. and there was something in my head. The corners of my mind were folding in before I could take anything in. My hands were slipping. My eyes were drifting, closing. I took a pen from the desk and stabbed myself in my upper thigh. It broke the spell for a brief moment, long enough for me to stay on my feet and look around, glancing over a floor covered in strewn papers, pencils, medical utensils, shattered potted plants, glimmering pieces of broken glass. A leg. Someone was there, face against the ground. I stabbed myself again. Something hot ran down my leg. I looked behind the counter I balanced on. Someone was there, too. And someone else. As my eyes adjusted, it seemed like everyone here had fallen wherever they were standing, during whatever they were doing, and it had been something. Some had put their hands on each other. There were scalpels and scissors scattered near them. I couldn't look over the noise. They were breathing. Some cut through the incessant noise of the heart monitors with heaving, convulsing moans, gasping, crying for air. But they breathed. They were alive. Alive and in pain. Alive and unconscious. Suffering with their eyes closed. Dreaming. My knees started to buckle. I stabbed myself again. Again. My eyes began to shut. I dug it in and twisted. I walked while I could still feel my sock turn soggy, hurting while I could still move to do something about it. I passed by doors softly swinging and saw briefly, feet under covers, hands dangling limp, eyes shut tight and mouths hanging open. Every one of our patients here had died in their beds while I was gone. The pen broke in my thigh. I replaced it with the sharp end of my fingernail and pushed around the corner. In the back, past the sticky heat in my hand, was his room. He'd still be there, like everyone else. I couldn't pick out his heart monitor among the rest. There was little reasoning to be had with the weight bearing down on me. I stopped thinking and kept walking. Thoughts and feelings can be difficult to recall when in the wake of something terrible. I was there. I remember what I saw, what I touched, but something in that hospital sits just out of sight. There's something watching from around those darkened corners that I don't remember how to see. It wanted me to close my eyes and collapse. It begged me to, and my only answer was in the tip of my finger. I don't know what would have happened if I'd let it put me to sleep. I think I came in too late for it to sink in like it did for everyone else. I think the scars on my leg are worth a lot. I groped further down the hall, stumbling past fallen bodies with one finger in my ear and the other in my leg. His room was just ahead of me now. It smelled like blood. It mixed with the copper stench of my dripping leg, and I ran the last few steps to the room. I hit the door and slipped. It was blood, pooling and crumpling my back against the slick tile as I landed. My head snapped up, and there he was. He was harrowing. The moonlight bathed him, and I saw he was again arched above his bed, his back achingly curled, almost perfectly still. His teeth brushed his pillow as his spit pooled, his mouth distending in silent pain, and his arm was moving. It trembled forward, shaking, leading up to his hand. There it glowed, split, flopping from the tip of his middle finger, where the remnant flaps of his skin, glistening with strands of red between them. Under them the fingers of his other hand, their own skin beginning to split as he pushed, ever pushed the ring, that ring, of course, up and out, through the skin, twisting, tearing the skin, anything to push it up and off, finally off. He moved and he bled profusely, unbearably, but he moved in his unconsciousness to make something happen, to fight back. I ran my hands over the bloody floor as he slowly pushed, decoupling the skin from flesh, working it forward and through. The ring was bright as it carved. There must be something. There must have been something that I couldn't see about the ring, something I couldn't understand. It bit at me and lunged against his soaking bed, throwing him against the wall, undoing his petrified arch, snapping his body limp as I wrestled with his gushing hand. The ring was dangling now, a centimeter of flesh and bone remaining in contact with it, sticking to the pink flaps of flesh now dropping over the tip. I gave it the extra pull. I tore away the skin and took my teeth to it. I tasted sickly metal, and only then did it come loose. The sudden release put me on my back again, and I writhed with the seconds of thought I had left. I twisted the scraps of flesh between my teeth. The weight pressed in again so strong, and I watched the ring spin red against the tile as I left. At last. I know his eyes never opened. I was so afraid of what I would see when mine closed. I guess my worst thing isn't much in the end. Anyone who spends enough time in a hospital has seen flesh tear and blood spill. Really, it was him. It was what he saw. I saw something awful. He bore witness. He knew that I could only feel. There's not much left. We woke up. He was dead. Incredibly so. Whatever he saw has no hold over him any longer. I have to dream. The ring was long gone when I came to in my own hospital bed. We were all reeling, some in ways that they never truly could make peace with. They saw. They all saw something, and they all forgot enough pieces of it to live. Many diagnosed instances of brain damage came from that day, but we lived, and we all had questions. There had been a tragic accident. Certain gases had been built up in the air, affecting our emotional regulation. That led to a sudden, spontaneous bodily reaction that knocked most of us out and killed many of our aging, weakened patients. It was a beautiful answer to square away what lingered. An excuse. I couldn't look at my coworkers much after. I always saw how we had been to each other before, and it pushed me away from that hospital for good. I wanted to believe with them. I wanted the presence I felt with that pen in my hand and those heart monitors singing to just be gas in my head. But it's there, right where I don't remember how to see it. Sleep doesn't comfort like it used to. Now, when I begin to dream, I dig into my leg until I wake, and then I wonder if it'll be back when I close my eyes, if a stranger will visit me while I sleep. If I'll ever wake to feel something tight and warm on my finger. If I'll ever wake at all. When I was younger, I was a big fan of urban exploration. My best friend at the time was too, and she knew all the best spots and all the rules for safe exploring. Some of the rules were pretty obvious. Wear tennis shoes and tall socks. Wear something you can move quickly and freely in. Take a flashlight and a bottle of water. Some of the rules were more subtle. Learn through years of trial and error. This story is about one of those rules, and how I insisted on learning it the hard way. Nikki, my friend, was and still is one of the smartest people I've ever known, which means she was also the best person for me to get into urban exploration with. Not only did she know all the best places, but I trusted her so completely I would do what she said without argument, most of the time. After our adventures exploring an abandoned Macy's, an old barn, and several spur-of-the-moment road trips, Nikki told me there was somewhere special she wanted to go. She wouldn't tell me anything about it until we got there, which was unusual, but only made me more excited to see whatever it was. I remember the first time I visited that place with her. It was late summer, when the leaves haven't started to turn yet, but you can feel the first cold spark in the air that promises the seasons are right about to change. One of the things I liked about exploring with Nikki was that she always drove us, so I got to sit in the passenger seat and watched the scenery pass us by. That day we drove out into the hills on the outskirts of town, passing neighborhoods, then houses, then fields with the occasional house, then nothing but trees, fields, and hills. I memorized the route we took, some part of me knowing already that I would want to return to this place. I wish I wasn't so good at memorizing directions. We had stopped for coffee before making our way out of town, and we laughed and sang loudly to the music on the radio as she drove. After a long time, Nikki pulled the car off to the side of the road, parked in an area that had no discernible markers as far as I could tell, and said with a grin, "We're here." I stepped out of the car and breathed in deeply, savoring the scent of tall grass, old growth trees, and rotting wood. I looked around at the tall pines and lovely aspens, then smiled at Nikki. I said, "All right, I'm not sure this one qualifies as urban exploration, but it's a nice spot." Nikki smirked and tossed her long, curly brown hair over her shoulder. "I guess it's not urban, no, but you're really going to like this." I followed her as we walked through the woods. There was no path, and I wasn't entirely sure there ever had been. It looked and felt like no one had been out here except for us. I had a brief moment of fear, remembering all those stories about people snapping and sacrificing their friends or classmates to Slender Man, then shook it off. After a few minutes of hiking over dead trees, through tall grass, and past strange detritus, I'm pretty sure I saw an old wagon completely overgrown with weeds at one point. I saw a structure not too far from us, partly obscured by the trees. Nikki pointed to the structure and said, "There it is." Just past a small river, hidden in the line of trees, was a miniature version of an old Victorian house. At one point in time it had been painted pink and blue. The trim around the windows had probably been white, and my inner child fell in love with it instantly. In a hushed, almost reverent tone I asked, "What is it?" Nikki gave me her most pleased smile, the expression she revealed for our best discoveries, and whispered back, "It's an old playhouse. I'm guessing some rich guy had it built for his daughters, ages and ages ago. It's beautiful, in kind of an unsettling way, right?" I nodded. It was beautiful in an unsettling way. There was something about it that made me feel like I would hear children's voices, or see a little girl dart out from behind it at any moment. The playhouse was at least 2 stories from what I could tell, and made of wood and stone rather than plastic. The paint was chipping off. The roof was caving in, and most of the glass windows were broken. I was entranced and began walking towards it. Sure, Nikki would know the best way to cross the river to get to it, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back. All she said was, "No." I laughed. "What do you mean? We came all the way out here and you don't want to go look at it?" She shook her head, an abnormally serious expression on her usual cheerful face. "We can stay on this side of the river and look at it, but we're not going over there." I chuckled again, but I was starting to get frustrated. "We can wade through the river if there's no bridge or anything. I promise I'll stand right next to your car until I'm dry if you don't have any towels." Nikki had learned the hard way to always keep a towel in the trunk of her car. She let go of my arm, but took a step back. "Mara, look around. Do you see beer bottles anywhere? Cigarettes? Soda cans? Candy wrappers?" I looked around at the ground, noting in surprise that I didn't see anything of the kind. "No, I guess whoever owns this land maintains it pretty well." Nikki said, "Nobody maintains it. It's just that no one wants to be out here for very long. If teenagers won't party here, then we shouldn't explore either. There's a reason no one wants to go close to that thing. We can admire from a distance, but we don't need to cross the river. Just trust me, okay?" I couldn't. I had always trusted her implicitly, And it had always been a good call, but this time I just couldn't understand why she was refusing to let me look closer at this amazing little discovery. We stood there in the field arguing about it for a few more minutes until Nikki finally threatened to abandon me there if I took one more step closer to the old playhouse. Of course, I had to take another step towards it, and she immediately turned around and started walking back towards the car, ready to make good on her promise. I laughed and chased after her, saying, I was kidding. She kept walking, not stopping until we made it back to the car, but I could tell she wasn't really angry with me. We brushed ourselves off, checked each other for ticks, another rule she learned the hard way, then got back in the car and went to the mall. When Nikki dropped me off at my house later that day, she looked me in the eyes and said, I was serious, Mara. If there's no sign of humans around a clearly man-made structure, that's a good sign you need to be careful. I smiled, but I couldn't meet her eyes as I said, Yeah, of course. I got you. I could tell she didn't feel good about it, but she went home anyway. I spent the next few weeks thinking about the playhouse non-stop. I had taken a few pictures of it, and I spent all my time looking at them, zooming in and out and studying the structure as if I was going to take a test on it. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and on one warm fall Saturday, I got in my car and traced our route back to the old playhouse. It was a lot harder to find alone, and I had to drive back and forth on the road for a while before I found the spot where I thought we had parked the last time. It was mid-afternoon, and the first thing I noticed when I got out of my car was the total lack of sound. There were no birds singing, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Nothing. I couldn't remember if I had heard animals or not when I came here with Nikki, but I pushed on despite my unease. I walked through the brush and tall grass for a while before I finally saw the playhouse in the distance. I had imagined that scene in my head in the days leading up to it, and I had expected to feel elation. Instead, I felt a vague unease as storm clouds gathered in the distance. I told myself it was just my brain fooling me because of the storm clouds and pushed on. When I got to the river, I walked up and down the banks a bit, looking for a log or some boards to cross on. There was nothing, which only made me think of Nikki's warning about avoiding places other people didn't want to be. I scoffed. Maybe that was the best place to be. For once, Nikki didn't know what she was talking about. After a few minutes, I was able to locate a fallen log and slide my way across it carefully. I almost tripped at one point and felt my heart rate increase dreadfully despite how shallow the water below was. I told myself it was just because I didn't want to get in my car wet or bother with washing the car towel Nikki had insisted I get, but something in my head screamed for me to turn back. When I stood in front of the playhouse, it all felt worth it. Despite the peeling paint, chipping wood, and cracked glass, there was an odd and distinct beauty to the old place. It reminded me of a dollhouse I'd had as a kid. I stood there in the woods for a long time just admiring it, before I got up the courage to go closer. I snapped a picture and sent it to Nikki, but there was no cell service. When I finally entered the structure, the first thing I noticed was the simple wooden floor, and how clean it was aside from some dirt and grass and a few small piles of leaves. That may not sound very clean, but if you've been in a lot of abandoned structures, you'll know what I mean. That's not just unusual, it's bizarre. I glanced up and saw that there was a small hatch in the ceiling and a simple rope ladder hanging down. The rope had frayed in the middle on one side, and slightly higher up on the other, so it was cut and dangling. I put one hand on it and tugged, then decided it wasn't sturdy enough to support my body weight. Part of me was kind of proud of myself. Even though I hadn't listened to Nikki when she asked me not to explore this place, I was still using her safety lessons. I figured if this went well, I could try and convince her to come back with me so she could see the place for herself. I snapped more pictures from the inside, the walls, the ceiling, the broken windows. After a moment, I noticed something in the pile of leaves and walked closer to investigate. It was a child's teacup set, perfectly intact and made from porcelain. I walked towards it like I was in a dream, and when I got there, noticed the wooden slats on the wall leading up to another hatch in the ceiling. I tested them, pushed down with one foot while I braced against the wall. When I told Nikki about it later, she said I should have used my hand, or a stick instead in case the wall collapsed. And when I had determined they were sturdy enough to hold me, I began to climb. When I got to the second floor of the playhouse, I nearly fell back to the ground floor in shock. Propped in one corner was a life-size doll of a man. It had a cloth body and porcelain head and hands. The face looked angry, with painted-on eyebrows and bright pink lips pulled down in a grimace. But the eyes looked more pained or afraid than angry. It was horribly unsettling, and I had to take a few minutes clinging to the wooden slats to catch my breath. After a moment, I realized I was hanging on pieces of rotting wood at least 8 to 10 feet up from the ground, and I scrambled onto the floor. The room was small, probably 6 feet across in either direction, and this room had more detritus in it. I saw scraps of what looked like fancy children's dresses among the wreck from the roof having caved in. I couldn't tell for sure how old the playhouse was, but years of snow, wind, and rain had clearly taken a toll. There were boards and shingles all over the floor, and when I glanced up at the ceiling, I could see only a few structural beams, and only trees and sky beyond that. I looked back down at the floor and felt a little snake of worry wiggling in my stomach. If teenagers won't party here, then we shouldn't explore either. I shoved down my worry and kicked out at the crumbling wood beams on the floor, wanting to move them so I could see what was underneath. The smiling face of a little girl looked back at me from under the rubble, and I screamed, stumbling backwards and landing in the lap of the life-size doll. It wrapped its arms around me, and I screamed even harder, then burst into tears of relief when I realized the arms had just fallen on me. I crawled away from the doll and laid on the floor for a moment, alternating between laughing and crying, until I felt something touch my ankle. It was a soft touch, so gentle I told myself I could pretend it didn't happen, but my stupid head turned of its own volition, looking down at my foot almost accusingly. A tiny, soft hand rested gently on my ankle, and I allowed my eyes to follow the hand up to the wrist, to the elbow, to the shoulder, and then to the tiny smiling face. I stared at it in horror, trying to process what I was seeing. There in the rubble was a little girl. She was the size of a very small child, and her skin was shiny and white like porcelain, but moved like regular skin. Her hair was pitch black, and her eyes were a shiny, happy blue. She stroked my ankle gently and asked, "Do you want to be my friend?" I don't know any other way to say this, but her voice was like porcelain too, delicate, bright, and oddly ethereal. I jerked my ankle away and crawled backwards like a crab, trying to put some distance between us. As soon as I did, her face fell, and for a moment I felt like the world's biggest monster. I said, I just want to go. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be here." Big tears welled up in her eyes as she said, "You don't want to play with me?" I was at a loss. On one hand, a little girl just crawled out of the rubble of a broken-down old playhouse in the middle of nowhere and was stroking my ankle like a creepy guy at a bar. On the other hand, apparently all she wanted was someone to play with, and I felt like kind of a massive jerk saying no to such a sweet request. I also felt like a massive fool for feeling bad instead of running away. I edged backwards again, and she asked, "Are you scared of me?" She slowly started crawling out of the rubble, revealing an equally doll-like body and strangely pristine pink, white, and blue dress. Instead of crawling towards me, she pulled herself up and walked over to the life-size doll on the floor. She pressed her hand to its cheek lovingly, and the doll's eyes flew open, revealing the real human eyes under the painted porcelain-looking ones. I screamed, and the doll opened its porcelain mouth as if to scream too, but the girl ripped her hand away, and the face went back to a painted porcelain mask. She said, "Daddy was always scared of me too." That was more than I could handle, and I threw myself down the open shaft with the rope ladder, giving myself some nasty rope burn as I used it to try and break my fall. I stumbled, fell, and heard a tiny porcelain voice say, "Don't run away. I'll have to make my daddy chase you." I decided to take that bet and sprinted out the door and through the shallow water, not stopping until I got back to my car. I fumbled the keys once, twice, before managing to get them in the door to unlock it, already sobbing in terror and relief as I slid in and locked the door behind me. I looked up to see a little girl holding the hand of the life-size doll, its head rolling limply on its shoulders, and I threw the car in reverse and backed out onto the road. I made it all the way home before I realized my cell was missing. It must have fallen out of my pocket when I ran away from the house. It was only a few hours before Nikki showed up at my house, looking pale and angry. She hugged me tightly and said, "What the hell, Mara? You went back without me?" I burst into tears all over again, and had to pull myself together to explain what had happened. When I was done, she said, "I don't think I'd be able to believe that story if you didn't look so scared right now. Did you take anything before you went out there?" I shook my head. "I was stone cold sober, Nick." She nodded vaguely. Just as her phone buzzed, she held it up to show that the message had come from my old number, the phone I had lost in the woods. I watched as she opened it up and showed me a picture of my car driving away from the playhouse. As the title should read, it would seem like my departure from this world is near. I debated for a long while on how to handle this. I am filled with the normal sorts of fears and concerns about dying. However, I may have an additional clue as to what will happen, as well as additional duties to take care of before I die, and it's because of these that I write this now. Simply put, I have a thing in my basement that won't die and cannot be left alone, and I'm afraid what will happen after I pass. What will it do? And how long until it escapes? Now I know this may all sound like the last thoughts of a demented dying man, to which I would say I am dying, but I am completely sound of mind. It may help to go back to when I first confronted the thing. I was born and bred in Belford, Mississippi. I'm 86 now, and it was in fact when I was 8 years old that I met it. My sister and I had been playing outside, her by the vegetable garden, and me around the tool shed in the backyard where my pa had badgered me to stay away. If only I had listened. I know not how differently my life would have turned out. But I was collecting roly-polies when I found a claw hammer seated neatly in the grass in front of the locked shed. To be totally correct, I heard it before I saw it. I heard, in a way, a faint whisper in my ear, but more like in my mind itself. When I looked up, searching for the speaker, I came eye to terrible eye with it. It stood staring at me, half hidden by the edge of the shed, roughly human, and I mean roughly. Its arms and legs proportions seemed wrong and unsettling, and it had an unusual rough texture across all its skin, and its awful, awful face was wreathed in bony protrusions, maybe horns. If you wanted to call it a demon, ghoul, monster, or something unnamed yet, you certainly could, as it suits your understanding of such a thing. But it was horrible. But curiously, as it spoke, none of the horror seemed to register in my mind. In fact, I was far more concerned about what it was saying. As best as my mind can recall, At that moment, I hardly recognized words being said to me, just a train of thought, a very convincing train of thought that guided me to pick up the hammer, walk into the vegetable garden, and begin to bludgeon my sister. Fortunately, I was a weak young boy, and my mother heard the awful sounds soon enough to intervene. My sister lived. However, a much abbreviated life, less than half of what I've lived so far. And through its entirety, she was deeply handicapped physically and mentally, never getting a moment where she didn't require support. She told me once, decades ago, that she forgave me, but I don't know if she truly knew what she was saying when she said it. On that day, it was after my mother shook me to sense that what I had done came crashing onto me, and the words that had followed so smoothly, like chocolate through my mind, came to manifest in their vulgarity and brutality. Suddenly I was overwhelmed with these words, some I had never heard before screaming around in my head. I was taken to a psychiatric ward for many months. Initially, I insisted on the entity that I recalled looking at me from around the corner of the house in the moments where my mother clutched my bleeding sister and carried her into the house and stood there in the garden. It might be just an addition made over time, but I can picture it waving to me. Eventually, I abandoned my insistence so I could be released. It would be many years later, when I was 24, now living in Braxton, Missouri, when I was driving along a country road past a children's party in a park when I saw it again. It would seem that some landscaping was being done nearby, and a gardener's shears had found itself in a little secluded spot just past the tree line around the park. It was this dirt road that gave me this fortunate angle. I saw the thing, just tucked behind a tree beckoning to a young girl who had strayed from the party. I parked my car as quietly and quickly as I could before I skulked over. It had begun its whispers. She stood there as still as the trees around her, frozen in trance. One thing I learned then, and has continued to be true, is that this thing is greedy and lustful for pain and violence beyond all else. It is only because of this weakness that it was distracted and careless enough for me to get behind it. Amongst the landscaping tools, I had spied a sledgehammer and snatched it up. As I approached, I got a better view of it. I learned that it stands above 7 feet in height in this form. It bends its spine in a grotesque manner, to be at nearly head height with its prey. But it was busy weaving its curse on her, which gave me the opportunity. To note, too, if you aren't its target, you can hear the words it speaks clearly, and I nearly blew my chance when I heard the horrific things it was instructing the girl to do. I remained hardened and brought the sledgehammer down on its head. I followed that with a couple more swings immediately before inspecting my work. I noticed that the girl began swaying and seemed as if waking up from a dream. So to spare her, I was able to pivot out of sight behind the trees, and with the creature lying on the ground when she woke, she seemed to only wonder why she was so far away from the party, and as Cake was called, she seemed to forget the episode completely and ran off. As soon as I judged she was out of earshot, I looked back down at my foe and caught it as it finished turning its head to face me. Its eyes met mine once again. I swung down on it again and again, only stopping when I was exhausted, having quickly sweat through my clothes in that Missouri heat. With horror, I learned the second thing I know about it, and that which is the root of all our problems, its otherworldly durability. Despite what must have counted in the dozens of swings with the sledgehammer, I had caved in about half its head, the other half looking nearly unscathed and its grin still intact. From then I knew my problems would not be solved so easily. I lugged that heavy monstrosity into my car and took it home. When I had arrived, the damage was about half healed. Its skull seemed to reinflate and push more to its exterior back into place. I went at it again with the sledgehammer, having exhausted myself and only reaching barely more damage than before. But I got it into my house and into my basement. The basement it remains in today, at this very moment. That many years later. Since then, I learned how to be more efficient and careful. A huge step was switching to a heavy, splitting maul. Tools with a more focused spot of impact to do more damage than purely blunt bludgeoning. It takes it longer to heal. Additionally, on the other end, blades also do little damage. A thin stab or cut heals basically the fastest, and even a resilient blade blunts far too quickly on its flesh to be helpful. The key is separation. Splitting the skull seems to do the most damage, and take it the longest to heal. Restraint is another crucial part. I procured one of those old-fashioned heavy metal dental chairs. This one had thick metal arms connected to it. It's bound to that chair now with clamps, handcuffs, and soldered metal bands. The next thing you need to know about it is it's immensely strong. I had scars on my face, arms, and chest when one of its arms got loose. It had a genuine police handcuff attached to its right arm, and it simply pulled against it and snapped the chain like a rubber band. This also leads to the next lesson. It's extremely smart, too. It had the opportunity to break the handcuff on that hand for maybe hours, but it waited until I was within arm's reach to make its move. It tore at me and wounded me badly, before I was able to strike it down with the maul. Restraint and damage. That is the name of the game. Overall, it's a schedule of checking its restraints and dealing enough damage to keep it healing continuously. You never want it to be healed enough that it's capable of thinking clearly or talking. Every day you must split its skull. It's by far the most efficient way. I do it at 8 in the morning and evening. I used to do it 3 times a day, including immediately before and after I slept up to 8 hours at night. Back then I set 3 alarms for each session to make sure. After a while, the schedule became more familiar to me than speaking. It's additionally difficult because it can heal at different speeds. I'm still unsure if this is by its own control or not, so it's key to damage it regularly. For the especially speedy recoveries, that's when maintaining the restraints pays off. Anyways, I'm old now, and the physical toll is getting to me. Years ago, I sprained my back swinging the maul. I fell to the ground in pain, and while its skull was still split and it remained inert, I swear I heard a giggle as I grunted and wept in agony. I fear that it may be aware and cognitive way earlier in its healing than it portrays. After that, I rigged the pulley system, where you turn a crank to raise the maul head, now with a heavy iron weight welded to the back of it. When it's at its apex, you pull a small cord attached to it, and it falls straight down onto its head. I won't waste too much time describing it. I'm sure you'll find it very intuitive to set up. And yes, I have tried to kill it for good. There simply isn't a way. If you can find a way, my spirit will rest easier, because I am aware of none. To start with the obvious, physical damage doesn't have lasting effects. It's never been fed or given water, but clearly that has not weakened it. I've also burned it, which truly does nothing whatsoever, and it just laughed at me. I've looked at the faiths and thrown holy water and touched it with every holy symbol I could get my hands on, and nothing has any effect on it at all. Hand saws are useless. I've used power saws, but they struggle to get through an inch of flesh before its teeth are filed down to nubs, and a new blade is needed. Acids, bases, poisons, and toxic gases are useless. It can't drown or asphyxiate. Over the many years, if there's a way you can think of, I have thought of it. Yet it persists. I must warn you of its cruelty, and why it is so important that it remains damaged beyond function for as long as you can maintain it. For one, it loves to whistle. Early on, whenever it could heal enough to function, I would find it silently pulling and wearing down the restraints. I would subdue it, then repair and reinforce its restraints again. I think over time it learned that it couldn't do enough damage to escape in the little time before I returned, so it took to whistling to me. I don't know how it knows it, but the song is one my mom sang to my sister and I when we were children. It may just be my mind responding to some abhorrent curse it spits from its teeth, or perhaps it's seen into my mind and it found this song that I haven't heard in so many decades. Similarly, sometimes it chooses to speak in the voice of someone you love. For me, it's either my sister, mother, or my paw, but those are the only people I've ever loved, so I don't know who it's capable of mimicking to you, or what you may hear or even see, and I apologize to you for this especially. When I die, someone will have to take this job for me. I would entrust it to a family member, but with this burden, I never was able to pursue long relationships in my life. A couple foolish times in my youth, I made some half-hearted, doomed attempts, but after all, I couldn't stay away longer than 8 hours at a time, and every minute passed I would be worrying what was happening in my basement, and what happens if I was to bring someone to my home. After some time, I would have to kick them out or disappear for a while to split its skull. They would have to eventually notice my peculiarity, and then what? There's questions I can't answer. I can never show them, never share it with anyone. I can't expect them to understand, to not be terrified of me. So I took this burden on in solitude, and that unfortunately is the greatest price I must ask of you. You will have to live a life of isolation and simplicity. No dinner parties, no bringing partners home, no sounds of little ones running. It will be you and the sound of a splitting skull, repeatedly, every single day. And once you take it on, you cannot share it. Keep it hidden, keep it quiet. It will be yours to bear alone, as it was mine, and your life will be lonely and your death will be quiet. That's truly what I am asking you. Beyond all the physical and emotional turmoil it will bring you directly, it is the life and loneliness that you will have to accept. I am hoping that someone out there will be willing to accept this, and live in silence as I have up until this point. Maybe you'll fare better than I, and be able to find a lasting solution, but if not, do your best to shoulder it. Be gentle with yourself, and when your time comes, like mine nearly has, pass it on to the next. If you choose to accept this, come to my house. I live in Braxford, Missouri. Come here and ask any old feller for directions to the Debson house, behind the old grain mill. If I am still alive, I will greet you and show you everything and prepare the handoff for when I die. If I am already dead, the spare key is under the mat. There will be a sticky note on my computer with my login information. When you have accepted this responsibility, sign on to this account and delete this story so no more have to know than necessary. If this story is still up, then the job is still open. Just hopefully I'm not dead for too long before someone takes the torch. If I am, and it has regenerated and succeeded in its attempt to escape, then pray for everyone. Thanks for letting me stay here. I said as I walked through the door, I needed a break from my roommate. He and his girlfriend of the last 6 weeks had gotten into yet another argument, and there were only two possible outcomes. Something would be thrown across the room, or hours of screwing, neither which I wanted to deal with. "You practically begged me," TJ replied, a sandy-haired man with green eyes about my age and height. He closed the door and led me into the living room. "I don't usually have people over." "Well, if I knew you lived like this, I would have asked sooner," I replied, comparing my tiny apartment in a college town to TJ's comfortable home. Judging by the clean brick exterior, spacious front yard, and hardwood floors, He must have lived quite comfortably, considering we had the same job. It's alright. I've lived here since I was a kid, TJ said. I'm going out on a date tonight, but help yourself to anything in the fridge. I have just about every streaming service, so watch whatever. Awesome. I seriously appreciate it, dude. Yeah, I only have one rule, TJ instructed. If you see someone in a raccoon suit outside, don't let him in. What? I chuckled, thinking he was joking, but his serious expression puzzled me. You're messing with me, right? No, not at all. If you see someone in a raccoon suit, don't let them in the house, he replied sternly, grabbing his keys from the coffee table. It hasn't happened in a while, but occasionally he comes around and can be a pain. Okay, that's kind of weird. I know, but if you see a guy dressed in a raccoon suit, do not let him in, TJ reiterated as he headed to the front door. I'll be gone for a few hours, and he's been coming around less and less, so you'll be fine. If I do see him, should I call the cops? No, it's not that serious. Just call or text me. I can shoo him away pretty easily, TJ replied. I don't want to get the cops involved. Okay, I said, still feeling confused. He had to be joking with me, as he gave me a gentle wave and walked out the door, locking it behind him. I looked out the window to see him pull away. It was starting to get dark. As I turned around and settled myself into a nice, plush couch. It was nearly 2 hours since TJ had left. I was comfortably settled, watching an HBO documentary about the crazy chimp lady. It was hard to believe someone could be so unhinged. Suddenly, a bright white light filled the room. It looked like a spotlight. As I approached, I saw shadows of trees, bushes, and other objects on the manicured lawn. The light itself felt like one of those used on escape prisoners in the movies. It was a bit overkill, but something else was out there, and I couldn't believe it. A man dressed in a raccoon suit. The light highlighted the stains, tears, and haggard look of his bodysuit. The head was worse. One ear dangled. The mouth part was covered in various colors. It looked as if the suit had never been washed, or for that matter, taken off. What is this? I said as its head turned towards me. It waved childishly before walking towards the house. I backed away from the window, my mouth agape. Knock, knock, knock. I stood in the living room, peering down the hall to the foyer. I saw the ragged ear from the small window of the door. It knocked again, more forcefully. Hello? I know you're in there, a male voice said, trying to sound cartoonish and cute. I'm just a talking raccoon. Why won't you let me come in so we can have an amazing adventure together? What? I yelled in confusion as he began to scratch lightly on the door. I took a couple of steps into the hallway. Listen, you just need to go away. It's been so long since I had an adventure, buddy, he screeched as he continued to scratch. I promise we will have lots of fun together, but you have to let me in. I'm not letting you in. Don't you want to have lots of fun? Hell no, I screamed. TJ said not to let you in. TJ, he said, overemphasizing the name as he began pawing at the window. Me and him go so far back. We used to go on adventures together. Oh boy, they were so much fun. Seriously, go away. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, you're making me sad, he replied, sniffing dramatically. I'm just a talking raccoon who wants to go on adventures, and you're just a big meanie genie. I'm done here, I shouted. Go away. I'm not talking anymore. Fine, he yelled back before a heavy thud shook the door, as if he had kicked it in anger. It became silent as the ears slowly retreated. I stood there silently, waiting to see if anything else would happen, but after a few moments, it was eerily quiet. I returned to the living room, my phone on the coffee table. I considered calling 911, but decided to text TJ instead. Perhaps I'd scared him off. Hesitating, I set my phone down. Sitting nervously on the couch, I clenched my jaw. My stomach churned and my legs jittered. I watched the chimp show, but something gnawed at me. I kept glancing at my phone, torn about calling TJ. Then I heard it. Scratching. I grabbed my phone and looked towards the foyer. The sound wasn't from there. It was coming from elsewhere in the house. My mind raced as I followed the sound down a hallway with 3 doors. The scratching grew more frantic. I passed the first door on the right, gently opening it to reveal a spotless bathroom. The sound didn't originate there. I turned to the left, opening the door slowly as the scratching intensified. The room was dark. I fumbled for the light switch, finding it eventually. The bedroom was immaculate. Stepping back out, I heard a voice. "Hello, new friend." I walked over to the door, pushing it open to reveal a dark room with a silhouette in the window. I found the light switch and turned it on. He stood outside, looking at me. But that wasn't what shocked me. Inside the room, crude drawings littered the walls. Finger paints and crayon scribbles showing 2 figures. One with yellow hair, and the other a raccoon standing on 2 legs. Some showed them holding hands, smiling or playing childish games. Others, more disturbing, showed the boy frowning and the raccoon crying. "See, me and TJ, the 2 of us go way back," he chatted. "We were the best of friends." "Okay. Now me and you can be the best friends," he added, tapping gently on the window. "Now can I please come in? Oh, pretty please." "No, TJ said not to let you in." "You don't know TJ like I do," he prodded. "He used to be such a fun boy, but then he changed. Something happened to him." "You're not coming into the house. Now go away." "He became a cruel boy, and my adventure buddy became so dark," he continued while waving his hand around the window. "You see it here in this room, don't you?" "I don't care," I insisted as he put down his hand, suddenly becoming silent for a moment. Even with the raccoon head, I could feel his stare boring right through me, leaving my stomach in knots. "He will hurt you like he hurt me," he replied, his voice with a light tremble. "But if you let me in, I won't let anyone, especially TJ, hurt my new best friend." My mind raced. The absurdity of it all. This had to be some sick joke, and there was only one person who would do something like this. "Alright, cut the crap," I smirked. "I'll give it to you. This is probably a funny prank, TJ." "I'm not TJ. I am a talking raccoon." "Talking raccoons don't exist. You're just a weird prankster in a costume." He stood there, outside in the window. For a moment, he lifted his fake paw and began rubbing his chin. I could hear him sigh as he conceded, still in his cartoonish voice. "All right, you caught me. Good job. You passed the friendship test." I let out a sigh of relief. "Alright, I'm glad we can end this game. Honestly, it was starting to freak me out." "Yeah, sorry. Sometimes I can get a little carried away." He chuckled, turning his head toward the front door. "I'll see you inside, I guess." "Can you take off the suit? I mean, it actually does sort of give me the creeps." "What?" he replied, turning his head back to me. "Take off the head part at least," I said as I stepped a little closer to the window. He started to breathe heavily, but stood there without saying a word. I began to feel a little uneasy again, starting to doubt myself. "Come on, Take it off and you can come inside. But I can't do that. Alright, there's one way to settle this then. I said, thinking of a solution to rest any doubt. I pulled up my phone and called TJ's number. The phone began to ring as we stood in a staring contest. What are you doing? I'm calling you, TJ. No, don't do that. My phone is in the treehouse. What? Hello? I heard TJ's voice over the phone. My eyes widened and I began to panic. Suddenly the man in the raccoon suit started to scratch at the window menacingly, tearing the screen. You're not the raccoon, I shouted loudly over the phone. What? Of course I'm not. Is he there? Seriously? TJ answered. Yes, he told me he was you. Just stay inside the house. I'm on my way back. TJ replied before hanging up. He noticed that I was no longer on the phone and bolted away from the window as I ran out of the room. I could hear a doorknob rattling from somewhere as I ran back to the foyer area to see him trying to open it. TJ's on his way. No, he cried, pounding on the door. I feared he might break in and didn't know what he was capable of. Let me in. He'll be home soon. The begging and banging stopped, but the silence was brief. I heard a crash and ran through the house searching for him. The sounds grew more violent, and I thought he was trying to break in, but I found no sign of him inside the house. Then I heard glass shattering. The raccoon man had a rock and was smashing my car windows. Glass flew everywhere as he swung his furry arm. He stopped and I felt relieved until I saw something worse. A small red gas can labeled with the word lawnmower. He was pouring gasoline inside. No, I shouted as he lit a grill lighter. I darted to the front door, unlocked it, and ran outside. Flames erupted from my car's shattered windows. I stopped as the fire grew, engulfing the interior. Then I heard a door slam. He was inside. Oh, crap, I muttered. I heard tires squealing and saw headlights approaching. I quickly ran out of the way as TJ burst out. Where is he? I think he went inside. TJ stormed towards his house and I followed meekly. He pushed the door open aggressively. Don't make me do it, he shouted. I lingered in the foyer, still fearful and not knowing what would transpire. TJ, where is he? I yelled as I heard someone running in the living room. I cautiously approached and saw TJ and the raccoon man facing each other. TJ held a broom. Raccoons live outside. Shoo, TJ taunted, swinging the broom wildly. A loud crack echoed as the broom hit the man. Get out of here now. No, I won. I finally won, the man shouted, blocking his face. I won. You can't shoo me anymore. I told you raccoons live outside, TJ insisted, hitting him again. TJ, I'm calling the cops, I barked, pulling out my phone. But then I saw him dive at TJ, tackling him to the ground. They rolled around, knocking over the coffee table. The raccoon costume's head came off. He looked like TJ, except his hair was long and tangled, with a beard, his skin covered in dried mud, and God knows what else, and his eyes wide with frenzy. I won. It's been 5 years, he snarled. He stood up, holding the broken broom handle. Now it's your turn to be the raccoon and live outside. I watched as he shoved the raccoon head onto TJ. I wasn't sure if I should call the cops. I walked outside and looked at my burning car, wondering how I was going to get home. I've been an Uber Eats driver for a couple months now. It's a poor excuse for work, especially in a small city like Lafayette. But it's been just enough to get me by until I find something better. Some nights people are generous, others they're stingy, but I can't really be mad about that. I know money's no easy thing to come by. I just have to keep reminding myself that it's temporary. It's temporary. Something's changed, though. I can't blame anyone for not believing me, but I have to tell someone about this. Maybe if the word gets out, it'll reach somebody who knows what I'm dealing with. Maybe they can tell me how much time I have left. Whatever this is, it's far beyond me. It started about a month ago on a Friday night. It was slower than most Fridays. Usually I can rely on the weekend bringing in the money, but I only got a few trips worth taking that night. At 9 p.m., I was just about to head back to my friend's apartment, back to the couch I've been calling home, when I heard that annoying sound Uber uses to tell you someone wants food again. Guess I forgot to go offline. I opened the app, reflexively moved my thumb to decline the trip, but then I saw the estimated fare, $78.47. I was in disbelief. I had never seen a fare that high before, not even close. I figured it had to be a cruel job. Sometimes customers will tease you with big tips to incentivize you to cancel any other orders and get them their food faster, only to reduce the tip at the last minute. My thumb started moving again towards that little X, but I hesitated. I couldn't bring myself to refuse it. Maybe I was desperate to make that night worthwhile. Maybe such an unorthodox fare demanded my attention. Either way, I was running out of time to take the offer. Unable to think it over any longer before it disappeared, I accepted. The trip was short and easy. I was lucky enough to already be on the east side of town, and the pickup spot was only 4 minutes away. I walked in, waited in line, went through the same steps that have become a near nightly routine, walked up to the counter and said, "I've got an Uber Eats order for Bailey J." At the sound of that name, the cashier's face immediately went sour. They looked at me like I had offended them just by walking in, like I'd ruined their whole day with that one sentence. After a few seconds of no response, I tried to cut through the tension that had suddenly crept over me, asking, "Do you need to see the—" They cut me off sharply. No, we don't." One of the cashiers turned around, grabbed 3 big carry-out bags and simply said, "Here." That one word dripped with so much spite, as if they wanted whatever was in those bags out of their store as soon as possible. I left in a hurry, and had no idea why they were so upset until I got back in my car and took a closer look at the order. This person, Bailey J., had ordered 30 burgers, all with no bread, no cheese, nothing but the meat. Maybe this seems like an overreaction to you, but people don't do stuff like this. They're predictable. They get the meal, a side, and a milkshake. 4 drinks with no food maybe. Not 10 pounds of nothing but ground beef. So this really had me freaked out. I thought about canceling the order right there. I hadn't verified the pickup yet, so I could have done so without any real issue. What time I didn't have to think this over earlier caught back up to me, as my mind started to race with the worst possibilities. What if this is some sicko using the app to lure me to his place with the money, only for me to end up missing? What if I was murdered or kidnapped? What if the burgers were just an appetizer and I was the main course? After a couple minutes of my mind running with wild panic, my worries started dying down as I offered myself some more reasonable explanations. Some people are very picky, and maybe they just really like this place's burgers in particular. Or maybe they're planning for a week of bulking. People do some pretty stupid stuff to get their protein in after all. I wasn't all too satisfied with these explanations, but they felt more likely than a psycho killer baiting me through Uber Eats. So I collected myself, found my breath again, and verified the pickup. My imagination can get away from me, but even my worst expectations failed to prepare me for what was waiting. The customer's drop-off spot was a Studio 6 off of I-49, just on the edge of where Lafayette meets Sorrento. When I drove up, I wasn't exactly expecting to see the life of luxury, but this place was run down even for a highway motel in Louisiana. It was surrounded by a rusted over chain link fence. Most of the street lamps along the perimeter were burnt out or flickering, and there were no signs of life besides a few cars dotted around the parking lot. I was filled with further doubts as I noticed many of them were broken into and missing tires, and there wasn't a single soul around to comfort my growing suspicion that something was very wrong here. I found the right room, parked right outside it, and hurried to the door. The instructions said, "Meet at door," but I was determined to leave the bag, give a knock, and book it out of there like my life depended on it. In that moment, I certainly felt like it did. I raised my hand to give a knock, but another surprise struck me. The door was cracked open with a pale blue light peeking through. I dropped the bag and rushed to text them that I'd left it outside so I could leave, but before I could even open my phone, I heard a frail, cracked voice come through the opening. "Please, can you bring the food in? I can't get up to grab it." The weary sound of these pleading words made me feel something other than terror, something strong enough to overpower how jumpy I had been. I felt empathy. Many people order food because they don't have the privilege of being able to get in a car with ease to get it themselves. They might be bedridden or wheelchair bound. Either way, they rely on people like me to bring them what they need. So I faced the door again and replied, "I'll bring it in. 1 sec." I grabbed the bag off the ground, took a couple seconds to still my nerves, and opened the door. I was immediately greeted with an awful smell, though I tried my best to not let it show on my face for the sake of being polite. But whoever had called me into that sad little motel room was nowhere in sight. Unwilling to go any further in, I called out, "Food for Bailey J? I have the bags here. I can set them down." The voice interrupted, louder and much less weak than before. "Yes, I'm in here. Come in, please." The sound seemed to be coming from all around me, but I noticed the bathroom door was open. This was the source of that light, a bright fluorescent glow, an offense to eyes that had been accustomed to the dark of the night. I slowly crept over, my heart and mind far outpacing my feet, rapidly theorizing what could possibly be waiting them. The smell got stronger with every step I took forward. It became impossible for me to ignore. I almost crossed the threshold when I saw a thick drop of liquid fall from the ceiling. I froze and arched my neck to see something part of me still fails to admit was really there. Just above me was a massive set of teeth, yellowed and gnashing, with exposed, discolored gums. The teeth belonged to a greater mass, some amalgamation of flesh clinging to the tiles of the bathroom ceiling. Even without eyes or a nose, it knew I had approached, and it became restless. Its tongue darted out of its mouth, reaching for something to grab hold of. Coils of muscle and tendon stretched from the mass, wildly thrashing through the air, gazing just past the top of my head. I quickly backed away from the bathroom and ran to the door, but it had shut and locked with no attempts to flip the bolt or twist the knob making any difference. I was trapped. I started screaming out of hopes someone might hear me, but there was no stir from the neighboring rooms. I fell to the floor and began to cry when I heard the voice again. This time it made no attempt to seem meek or even human. The words boomed in my head as if they were spoken from right behind my eyes. "Feed me, and you may leave." After a moment or two of denial and acceptance grappling for control over my next course of action, I peered back into that brightly lit room. From this distance I couldn't see any sign of the teeth, but I could hear them chattering in anticipation. Finally I got up, grabbed the bags, and walked to the entrance of the bathroom. Now I noticed in the corner next to the toilet was a shovel. I opened all the styrofoam containers, 5 patties in each one, and picked up the shovel. As I did, I could tell the mass was delighted at my cooperation. More saliva dripped to the floor as its tongue appeared again from behind its teeth. I put several patties on the shovel and lifted it up, angling it carefully to not drop any out of fear that might make it angry. It lapped the meat into its mouth and began to chew. Bits of beef and spit fell onto me. My skin crawled at the touch, but I dreaded the idea of upsetting this thing so much that I stood still and stomached it. After a few more shovelfuls, the meat was gone and the mass seemed pleased with itself. I then heard a loud click come from the door, signaling my freedom. Desperate to be anywhere but there, I made my way towards it, never taking my eyes off the bathroom. Before I could exit, that voice came from within again, commanding me. "You will return next week. Same time, same day. You will be paid every time that I feed. Leave and do not come back until you are called." I ran to my car, turned the ignition, and sped out of there, constantly checking my rearview mirror to see if I was followed. There was no sign of anyone or anything coming after me. When I got back to my friend's apartment, I thought of telling him about what I'd seen, but I realized that even I couldn't come to grips with whether or not any of that was real. I had nowhere else to stay, and I couldn't jeopardize having somewhere to sleep. He might have very well thought I was losing it. 30 minutes later, I got the notification. I received a $75 tip. Every week on Friday at 9 p.m., I get a trip offer from Bailey J. Each time the fare is higher, and the order is bigger. I thought about refusing it the second time it happened, but it kept popping up, and each time I declined it, I could hear an ear-piercing sound get louder and louder, growing to a deafening volume. It didn't stop until I pressed accept. Every time I go back into that room, it's gotten bigger. It's spread across the entire ceiling now. It's consumed the shower, and tendrils of flesh now hang over the bathroom door. I have no idea what I'm feeding, what it will grow into. Last time I was there, I saw something beginning to emerge from just above its teeth. It looked like an eye. I haven't slept much these past couple of weeks. Listen, I don't really know where to begin with this whole ordeal. It's just been weighing on my mind lately, and no matter what I do, I just can't seem to get it out of my head. So I thought I'd write it down. I'm in my second year at university, studying chemistry. Rather boring, I know. And I had a friend studying astronomy, called Garth. He was staying late one night. He'd been ill for a week and needed to catch up on some coursework. I decided to accompany him because I honestly didn't have anything better to do. So we're sitting in the study hall, just us. Garth across from me taking notes from his brittle laptop that was probably top of the line back in 2012. And I'm bored out of my mind. Nothing interesting on my phone. I don't have the energy to read any books, and I sure as hell wasn't going to do any of my own work. My eyes dart around the room for anything to distract me, and I do mean anything. There's a brief moment where I contemplate getting up and repeatedly flicking the light switch on and off. Ultimately, I don't do that, because I'm not that much of an a-hole. Instead, my eyes finally land on something else. At the back of the room, facing a large glass window, is a telescope. The telescope is big. Not huge, mind you. Just bigger than any telescope I had seen up to that point. It's an ashen gray color, with deep red highlights on all the shifting sections of the device. It looks expensive, and I don't really want to be in any further debt. So I touch it slowly and methodically, making sure that everything is held as securely as it should be. Its weight is supported enough for the worry in my brain to instantly evaporate, replaced just as quickly with newfound curiosity. I've never been much of a space guy. It just never really caught my interest in comparison with the other major sciences. Yet there I was, almost giddy as I put my eye to the viewfinder, only to be met with pure, oppressive darkness. No lights, no stars, not even a moon, but that was quickly rectified when I unscrewed the lens cap. Not my proudest moment, all things considered. But here's where it gets interesting. The way the window was installed gave me a clear view of the moon, the white beacon visible through the upper echelon of the window. I put my eye back on the viewfinder and quickly panned the telescope so that it was facing the moon. The telescope had some good zoom on it. I was able to make out all the different craters and rocks that scattered the moon's surface, and despite my general apathy for space and astronomy, I found myself feeling an almost childlike wonder as I gazed upon this faraway land. Then suddenly, while slowly adjusting the lens focus in an attempt to get an even clearer picture of the moon's surface, I saw something move. My breath froze and my heart raced as I pulled myself away from the viewfinder. A pause. I look over at Garth and he's still buried in his work. My brain tries its best to rationalize the movement as something natural. Too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Knocking the telescope slightly, straining my eye to see clearer. I sigh, relieved, finding it almost laughable how easily I had scared myself with something so trivial. I bring my eye back down to the viewfinder to get another look at the moon, and that's when I see it again. It hasn't stopped moving since I last looked. It's big. It had to be if I was able to make out from such a distance. The thing looks almost human, but I wasn't able to get a good enough look at it. Its skin looks almost identical to the dust that coated the moon itself. The only reason I was able to make out its rough shape was because of the harsh shadows that shrouded its body, leaving its silhouette trailing on the floor behind itself. Again, I could barely make it out, but it looked as if you got a stick bug to stand up on its back legs. My breath once again gets caught in my mouth, but I don't pull away this time. The feeling of unease creeps over me. I was already terrified, but this was something else. It felt like if I continued to stare, something bad would happen. But no matter how hard I tried, how hard I pleaded with myself to move, I just wouldn't budge. Not an inch. My eyes are still fixed on the thing when it stops moving. It turns its head to look at me. At least that's what I think it's doing. It's hard to make out all the details, but I know it's looking at me. You know that feeling? When it feels like something is watching you. The moment its head stopped moving, that feeling seemed to burrow itself deep into me. Despite it being too far to ever be able to see me directly, I know it's looking at me. Not looking at the earth, not looking at my country, looking at me. Directly at me. The thing seems to raise a hand to point at me, and it's then that I find the motivation to step back out of the viewfinder and away from the window, pushing myself backwards as quickly and forcefully as I can, slamming against the wall on the other side of the room. The moment I do, the feeling stops. "Dude, you okay?" Garth asks, turning to look at me the moment he hears the crash of my back hitting the wall at a worrying pace. All I can do in reply is point a shaky hand towards the telescope. He eyes me skeptically, as you'd expect, and gets up to walk towards the telescope. He puts his eye on the viewfinder. "Are you messing with me?" He turns to look at me with a pissed-off expression. "Why did I fall for it?" He goes back to his stuff and picks it up, quickly leaving the room. I don't want to be on my own with that telescope or that moon any longer than I have to. Getting up, I make a hasty escape towards the door Garth left through, and before I make it through the door, I take one last look at the telescope in the corner of the room. Its lens cap is still neatly discarded on the floor, and I don't have the courage to put it back. It's been 2 weeks since that night, and strange things have started happening. For a while now, virtually every time I looked at the moon, I could feel it looking right back at me. Once again, not at the earth, but at me specifically, and I'm positive that it knows that I know. I've also been having these weird dreams. Well, dream, to be specific. It's the same one almost every night. I'm lying down in my bed, paralyzed from the neck down, and that thing is in the room with me. It's far too big to fit inside normally, so it's hunched over to what must be a painful degree, with its long gray fingers gripping the end of my bed like a vice. I can see it no clearer than when I first saw it all those weeks ago. Its features are shrouded in a shadow that engulfs my room. The only actual notable features I can make out are the thin, wet hairs that pool on my legs, and the fetid odor that seems to emanate from them. Every time it's there, I feel the need to retch as the putrid smell creeps towards me. Its ragged breathing is devoid of any rhythm, as if it's learning how to breathe for the very first time in its life, constantly having to remember to use its lungs on our oxygenated planet. And then I wake up. Though in all honesty, I don't think I'm dreaming. There's been a few moments when I awaken from the prolonged state of sleep paralysis and find myself feeling that exact same sense of foreboding that I experience when I look at the moon. It's always far too dark for my brain to make out anything in my room, but sometimes, just sometimes, I can feel the disgusting sensation of its long, slick hair slithering away from my legs and out of my room. I could put this down to my brain still being in some sort of sleep state when I wake up, and that would make perfect sense, if not for the fact that every time it happens, my legs are soaking wet, not from sweat or any other natural fluids. No, this is far too oily to be anything human. It can't be. I get up and look, and just like every time before it, a dark trail of something leads directly from my bed, across my floor and out of my window. I shudder at the picture my brain conjures of how this thing would have to contort itself just to fit through my window. It's like that almost every night. It's gotten to the point that I dread going to sleep at night, and actively try to stay awake for as long as I can. It's not a healthy lifestyle, but in all honesty, I prefer unhealthy to dealing with that thing. But something else happened. Something far worse happened than reoccurring dreams. And it firmly planted the fact that this thing was real in my mind. About a week ago, Garth stopped showing up to class. He had been getting worse before then, a little slower to react, too tired to bite back whenever someone insulted him, eyes sunken and dreary. I didn't understand what was up with him at first. I wish I never found out. 3 days after he stopped showing up, I went to his flat just to check up on him. I raised my hand and knocked on the door and waited. No reply. So I went to knock again, and that's when it hit me. That stench. That foul, wretched stench. The stench of death. I was too scared to do anything, so I ran. I ran out of the university accommodation until I could run no longer. I didn't know what to do. I ended up contacting the staff who run the housing, asking to check in on him, hoping, praying that he was all right. But sadly, I knew deep down what had happened. The paramedics had ruled Garth's death a heart attack. He had passed away in his sleep, where he had been left for 2 days. No one bothered to complain about it because he'd been ill before, and his accommodation block was on the cheaper side, where different smells from different rooms would blend easily. I would often hear classmates go around saying things like, "Well, at least he died peacefully," or, "I think he would have been happy." But I know that whatever happened to him was not peaceful. It was not happy. I don't know what that thing could have done to stop his heart, and I'm scared to find out. I haven't slept in 4 days. I keep seeing things in the corner of my eye, and each day it's getting worse and worse. I don't know how much longer I can go on. I've practically lost all energy and drive to keep going. Maybe I'll end it on my own terms, but I don't think it'd let me. I'm sure it wouldn't have let Garth. I know what's going to happen. I'm not ready for it. I'll never be ready for it. In all honesty, I just hope that it's quick. I'm sorry for burdening you all, and I'm sorry for burdening my friend. Good night, everyone. I came out of work to find this little leather book under my windshield wiper and my back window shattered. I'm both mad and curious. Here's what it said. I'm not sure why I'm writing this down. Perhaps it's a way of coping. Maybe deep down I still have some hope and this will serve as a written record. No matter the reason, I find a bit of comfort in putting the events on paper and will continue to do so for as long as I am able. My memory is not perfect, and I didn't begin writing things down immediately. It took a while for Helen and I to accept our situation. We were just your average American couple in their late 20s. We had just attended a football game with our little bud, and were attempting to return to our car when we entered the lot. 9/8/23. Bud had grown cranky. Neither of us were big fans of the teams playing, so we elected to leave the game a little early. It would give us a chance to beat traffic, we reasoned. The sun was already low in the sky when we left the stadium behind. I don't remember who noticed it first, but the sheer desolation of the parking lot was eerie. Not empty of cars, mind you. Every spot was full, but rather empty of people. The next thing we noticed was the hills. I don't remember the lot being this steep, Helen had said. Did we go out the wrong door? We had been to this place a dozen times over the years. Never had the parking lot been made up of rolling hills like this. It made it feel like as if we were on the ocean, surrounded by rising and falling waves of multicolored steel bugs. When the sun finally dropped behind the horizon and darkness flooded the lot, I found an irrational fear rising up. Bud whimpered and Helen comforted him. The air wasn't overly cold, just chilly enough to be uncomfortable. Something was wrong. There were no lights. Not only were there no lights in the lot, but there were none on the distant hills. No buildings rose up. I looked in every direction. All I could see was the ever-darkening line of cars. It simply couldn't be. 9/9/23. We had walked all night, taking turns carrying Bud. The sun rose, revealing the endless cars. Our phones didn't work. There was no service. We fought. I blamed the stress and sleep deprivation. I felt we had to keep moving. This couldn't go on forever. Helen insisted that we stay put, that walking would just make us harder to find. 9/10/23. We didn't want to, but we broke into someone's car. They had a pack of water in their back seat. We needed it. I left a note just in case. 9/11/23. The infighting was replaced by silence. Our feet hurt. We must have walked a dozen miles by now. 9/12/23. It was worrying how accustomed we had become to breaking into strangers' vehicles. We slept in a conversion van that night. 9/20/23. We left the van. The food had ran out and the batteries were dead. It had given us a chance to rest our legs. I worry Bud isn't getting the nutrients he needs. 9/22/23. I had tried a few times before with no luck. This time I got it started. It was an older Ford pickup, but my joy was short-lived once I realized I couldn't steer it. We used the running engine to stay warm that night and to charge our phones. They didn't have service, but they felt like our last connection to the real world. 9/23/23. I saw a deer today. It's the first living thing I've seen since this started. 9/24/23. Bud was sleeping. Helen and I got intimate. We're going to have to be more careful. A pregnancy would be disastrous. 9/25/23. Call it naive living, but we have settled into a comfortable routine. Bud rides in a wagon we found along with our extra food and water. While I have grown tired of hot dogs, granola bars, and candy, we won't be starving anytime soon. Water bottles are the most common thing we find. Occasionally, we will come across a vehicle filled with groceries. 10/8/23. It has been a month. Despite our less than ideal diet, Helen and I are quite lean. I don't know how many miles we have walked. I'm on my third pair of shoes at this point. Luckily, the weather is still mild. I don't know what we're going to do after it starts to freeze. Bud has grown. The little rascal is always getting into things. 10/15/23. I haven't told Helen. There's been a shift. The food we are finding is more stale than before, but it's not just the food. The vehicles are older. I don't know when the shift started, as it was so gradual. The newest vehicle I've seen all day was a 2010 Toyota. 10/30/23. We've decided to turn back. Not only have the vehicles grown older, but food and water are more scarce. The tipping point was the delivery of a line of cars with the windows smashed. It felt ominous. We will be returning to greener pastures. 11/2/23. It didn't work. I don't think the lot will let us go back. 11/3/23. I did an experiment last night. I marked a car as we passed it. This morning I tried to return and the car wasn't there. What if Helen and I had decided to look in different directions? The very thought of it makes me sick. I don't even want to leave Bud in a separate vehicle while we make love. I couldn't imagine the horror of not being able to find him again. 11/12/23. We can't go back. We don't want to go forward. That leaves one option. We will be staying put. I erected a flagpole from what I could find. Even though it is visible from quite a distance, we still travel as a trio everywhere. 11/15/23. It wasn't easy, but we managed to move multiple vehicles. We have a square of vans. In the center, we carpeted the asphalt and set up a bunch of seats as couches. I was never much of a hands-on guy before this. Necessity has forced me to learn. We even have a small solar panel feeding a battery pack. In turn, we used the batteries to power a TV I pulled from an Escalade, as well as a string of dome lights around our home. It is nice to finally be able to let Bud wander around without fear of him disappearing or getting hurt. 12/25/23. If I kept track of things properly, today should be Christmas. I gifted Helen a necklace I had found a while back. We spent the day sitting around watching DVDs and getting tipsy. 12/30/23. It snowed this morning. 1/5/24. We aren't alone. I woke up and went outside to pee. When I did, I saw footprints in the snow. Bare feet. A couple different sizes. The tracks led all around our home. They congregated near the windows. They had been watching Helen and I sleep. I rushed inside and checked on Bud with Helen. They were both peacefully sleeping. 1/6/24. I told Helen about the footprints. She was visibly disturbed and wanted to leave right away. We should go. If we leave, then they won't be able to follow us. This place doesn't let you go back after all. They can have this. We'll make another shelter. I had thought of this place as more than a shelter. It was our home, and I wouldn't let anyone take it from us. No, we should stay. I would rather have a barrier around us than be caught out in the open. Helen reluctantly agreed to stay. She had always been the level-headed one. 1/8/24. We did our best to prepare for a possible siege. The snow was gone, so we had no way of knowing if there was still others out there. I think I found the jackpot. Under the seat of a car, I found a revolver. It has 6 shots in it. I've never even fired a gun before, but it should be pretty simple. 1/9/24. They came back last night. I woke up to Bud crying. I jumped from our bed and saw an arm reaching through a window. It was blindly grasping about. In a protective rage, I charged forward and grabbed the offender's wrist. Bending the arm against the window frame, I pushed until I felt the bone snap. The owner of the arm didn't make a sound. I pulled on the arm again and again, slamming the man's body into the outside wall. He managed to wrench himself free of my grasp. Helen was right behind me. She crouched to soothe Bud. She didn't need to say it, but I knew she was pissed that I had decided to stay. 2-1-24. They're behind us. I could hear them last night breaking windows in the distance. I held Helen close. Bud was between us. He seemed to instinctively know to keep quiet. 2-29-24? I haven't written in a while, nor have I been keeping track of the days. Keeping Bud fed has been my biggest priority now that Helen is gone. They found us the next night. We had taken shelter in a contractor van. There were no windows in the rear, and the floor had plenty of room for us to stretch out. We thought it would be perfect. The doors weren't even locked when we found it. We later discovered the locks on the back were broken. I woke to the slapping of bare feet outside. I nudged Helen. She woke instantly. The darkness really can't be described. It was the complete absence of light. No moon, no stars, no distant cities. Just pure, undefiled black. I heard Helen shift as she pulled Bud in close. I held my breath. The feet continued past. A window nearby shattered, scaring Bud. He was still so young. He couldn't have understood. Screaming like banshees, they assaulted the van. It rocked violently side to side as they crashed into it. The front windows were smashed in. A dim light shone around. They had flashlights and headlamps. There was a divider between the cab and the back of the van. It was made of sturdy steel. I used the light spilling in to grab the revolver. They yanked on the back doors, but I paid them little mind. At least I did until the doors flew open. Helen screamed as bodies poured in. I fired into the writhing mass. The gun flew from my hand and hit my face before falling somewhere. I didn't have time to react. Blood partially blinded one eye. I swung at whatever moved. I had never struck another human in my life before this. I had no choice now. I bit, clawed, and gouged with all my might. Helen kicked at those grabbing her. She held Bud tightly to her chest. For just an instant we made eye contact. Spinning over, she shoved Bud across the metal floor. Then she was gone. The horde disappeared as fast as they had come. I scooped Bud into my arms and jumped from the van. I heard a distant scream. They were already so far away. I ran and I ran until I puked. I couldn't find them. I was alone in the dark, the silent darkness that enveloped everything. The van was gone, all of our supplies along with it. I struggled to get Bud to eat. He was so heavy to carry. The cars were mostly empty. Finally, after a couple days, I found a 4-door Maverick. The keys were in it. There was a stroller in the trunk as well. The engine grew rougher with time. I kept it going by punching holes in the gas tanks of other cars. I noticed the gas was yellow now. It still worked, but not well. The car died next to a 1931 Chevy. My dad had one of those when I was a kid. Just like this one, his wouldn't start either. I would be walking again. At least the car had given me a chance to cover a lot of ground and build up a stockpile of supplies. 3-1-24. I found a cowboy rifle in the back window of a truck. The glove box contained 2 boxes of bullets. I placed Bud in a car where his ears would be safe and did some practice shooting. The rifle was much easier to handle. I almost felt confident that I could defend myself with it if needed. 3-2-24. I shot a deer. I cried over it, and I don't know why. I spent all day using the engine of a car to cook the meat. It wasn't easy, but food is getting scarce. 3-3-24. I'm a fool. I woke up in the middle of the night to the most terrifying snarling and growling. I held Bud close and prayed whatever was out there wouldn't find us. When the sun came up, I found the deer carcass strewn about. Our stroller was destroyed as well. This was a new threat. In the blood I could make out paw marks. Be it rabid dogs or wolves, I didn't care. Either could be a death sentence. I quickly saved what I could and left the area. 3/5/24. I've lost track of my days a couple times. Not that it really matters. Food and water are so scarce I doubt we will survive much longer. I don't even recognize the cars anymore. Doodle bugs, maybe. I don't know. They don't offer much shelter unless you find an enclosed one. 3/8/24. I miss Helen. I didn't walk today. Too hungry. I sat and I cried for a good long time. I buried my wedding ring in a pothole and placed a cross above it. If Bud and I are to survive, I need to let her go. 4/1/24. Call me a fool. 4/3/24. There was a missing car today. This is the first time I've seen an empty space in the lot. 4/15/24. It's been days since I found food or water. My supplies are running low. 4/20/24. I gave Bud the last bar. We have a couple of bottles of water left. 4/25/24. I knew it was coming. He was too little to survive on water alone. I could see his ribs plainly. He never cried. My tough little buddy never made a peep. He wrapped his precious little fingers around mine and snuggled in close. I tousled his crazy hair one last time. I lay there listening to his breathing grow softer. My heart split in two, but I knew he wasn't hurting anymore. His tiny, frail little body looked so peaceful. I could join him. I could end this all. 5/28/24. There are no cars in the lot anymore. 6/1/24. My salvation came in the form of peas. I find them often. They grow up through the cracks in the asphalt. I replenish my water with the puddles. 7/13/24. I discarded my shoes. They were little more than flaps of ruined cloth at this point. The asphalt patches are getting farther apart. Most of my walking is on grass. 7/20/24. The ankle-deep grass has given way to small shrubs. I had walked in silence so long that the snapping of a branch nearby sounded deafening. I turned to see a wild deer and ravenous dog charging towards me. I managed to squeeze off a shot before the hairy behemoth slammed me to the ground. The shot had been true and the dog was dead. He tasted awful. 8/12/24. I couldn't sleep. I walked through the night. Exhausted, I stumbled onto the largest piece of asphalt I had seen in weeks. In the darkness, I came across a vehicle. It was something modern. I bashed out the window and crawled inside. Movement woke me. I couldn't place it. It had been so long. The cry of a seagull rang out again. I sat up suddenly alert. I could see. I could see without the sun. Street lamps lined a distant highway. Buildings rose up along the horizon. I fell from the vehicle. It made sense. It all makes sense now. I'm sorry for your window. Take this journal. I have to go back. Helen could still be alive.